Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Community Development Block Grant Writing Application Workshop. My name is Melissa Latham. I'm the Director of Communications and Policy at CDFA, and we're happy to have you with us today. Please note that we are recording today's session, and we will share that along with presentation slides and other materials in the coming days. We do anticipate today's session to run from now until about 3:30 in the afternoon. And we do welcome questions at any point during the presentation. So if you could, please share those in the Q&A box on your screen. We will be pausing throughout the presentation to answer those questions, and we should also have time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions you may have. As you can see on this slide, this afternoon we're going to cover a brief overview of the Community Development Finance Authority for those of you who might not be familiar. We'll talk about the Community Development Block Grant Program, including eligible applicants, the national objectives, eligible activities, as well as the New Hampshire application process. And again, we'll have time for questions throughout the presentation as well as at the end. If you could take a moment to introduce yourself by including your name and the organization or project that you're representing today in the chat box, that'd be great, just so that we can familiarize ourselves with those who are present and you all can see who's joining us this afternoon. As I mentioned, we're going to go over briefly the Community Development Finance Authority. So we are a statewide community and economic development entity, and we serve all of New Hampshire. Our mission is to maximize the value and impact of community development, economic development, and clean energy initiatives throughout the state. We see a future New Hampshire whose communities are economically and socially resilient, reflect and respect our natural surroundings, and are places where people want to live, work, and play. So our overall mission is really to meet the evolving community economic development needs of New Hampshire communities. As you can see on this slide, in state fiscal year 2025, we made a significant number of investments in nearly 70 community-based initiatives, which marked nearly $16.5 million in capital infused into New Hampshire communities. We also engaged 160 business donors in our efforts. You can see the outcomes of those investments here, and you can also see that they are geographically diverse and spread across the state. So we provide a variety of financial resources, including the competitive deployment of grants, loans, and state tax credit equity. Our staff also provides technical assistance to prospective applicants from communities, nonprofits, and for-profit businesses. And we really work with applicants to understand their project, align that project with the different types of funding and financing that CDFA has, navigate our application and review process, as well as connect you with other potential funding sources that may make sense for your project. And we really see the impact of these investments and our technical assistance in revitalized downtowns, high-quality childcare facilities, renovated housing, clean energy projects, business expansions to provide jobs, and a healthy and vibrant nonprofit sector. You can see here the number of ways that we invest in New Hampshire. We have resources from concept initiation through to support organizations in planning and development, and lastly, in implementation. We're going to spend a good portion of our time today talking about that implementation piece, which is where the Community Development Block Grant resource sits in that funding ecosystem. But just as you can see here, we can support projects throughout the life cycle, from when you might be in that early stage of developing a concept to planning for that implementation piece. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to my colleague Molly Kaler, our Director of Housing and Community Development, who's going to share more about the Block Grant Program. And I'll also note that you'll hear from our colleague Chris Monroe throughout the presentation as well. So thank you again for joining us, and Molly, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. As Melissa said, my name is Molly Kaler. I am the Director of Housing and Community Development here at CDFA. I oversee the CDBG program along with my colleague Molly Donovan, who oversees the economic development and micro enterprise CDBG programs. We have a team of staff that help run the CDBG program, including Chris Monroe, who you'll hear from later today, Julius Peel, and Melanie Steenbeck, who helps with our contracts. Now we're going to get into a little bit about the CDBG program. So CDBG is a federal program that was established under the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 to address a wide range of housing and community development goals. The primary statutory goals of the program are to develop viable communities by providing decent housing and a suitable living environment, and also expanding economic opportunities, principally for persons of low and moderate income. Through an annual formula allocation process, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who we refer to as HUD, provides federal CDBG funds to both entitlement communities and states. CDFA has administered the annual statewide allocation of CDBG funds on behalf of the state of New Hampshire since 2003, coordinating the investment of more than $204 million into New Hampshire communities. These critical resources have been deployed across the state and have made a significant impact on economic development, housing, and community-based projects in dozens of municipalities. CDFA deploys approximately $9.4 million a year of community development block grants. At the national level, the HUD CDBG funding is broken into two primary program areas to be distributed to communities. It's referred to as the entitlement program and then the state program. As we discussed in the last slide, entitlement communities receive funds directly from HUD. The state-administered CDBG program, which CDFA administers, is available to all other municipalities. This pie chart right here shows that nationwide, on average, entitlement communities receive up to 70% of the overall CDBG funding at the national level, and 30% of that overall funds go to state-run state and small cities programs like what CDFA administers. In New Hampshire, there are a small number of entitlement communities, and they receive about a quarter of the CDBG funding that New Hampshire receives overall, and the balance goes to CDFA. CDFA currently allocates our annual allocation across three major categories: housing, public facilities, and economic development. And that's in addition to some funding that is set aside for planning grants, emergency use, and then the general administration and technical assistance of the program. This graphic illustrates how the CDBG program funding flows. Funding is first allocated to CDFA by HUD. CDFA then awards funding to a local unit of government, a municipality or a county, who oftentimes works with an eligible organization who will be carrying out the project. That person is called a sub-applicant. And then the project ultimately benefits low to moderate income individuals who we refer to as beneficiaries. Next, we're going to provide an overview of the eligibility for CDBG programs. So there are a number of different programs and corresponding funding opportunities that we're going to talk about today, but they share some overall eligibility requirements that we're going to get into. So CDBG is a bit different than many other grant programs when it comes to who is eligible to apply. It is a federal requirement that the applicant for these funds must be a unit of general local government. So in other words, in New Hampshire, it is a municipality or a county. Funding is then often subgranted to an eligible subrecipient organization who is the one that carries out the project. However, sometimes grantees, that again is the local unit of government, can also carry out projects directly. All New Hampshire counties and municipalities are eligible to apply for CDBG funds through CDFA, with the exception of the 5 cities that are HUD entitlement communities. And here on the screen, we note what 5 communities those are. And those communities, Manchester, Nashua, Portsmouth, Rochester, and Dover, again, do receive an annual CDBG allocation directly from HUD. So if your project is located in one of those communities, you're likely not eligible to apply for CDBG funds through us here at CDFA. However, you will want to contact your local municipality to discuss your project and see if CDBG entitlement funding might be appropriate resource. The CDBG statute says that each funded activity must meet one of 3 CDBG national objectives. You'll see on the screen here, the national objectives are distinguished by a green circle, a blue square, and a red triangle. The 3 national objectives are to provide direct benefit to low to moderate income persons, which is the green circle, to aid in the prevention or elimination of slums or blight, which is the blue square, or the elimination of a serious and immediate threat to public health and safety. That's referred to as urgent need and is represented by the red triangle. In New Hampshire, all projects must have a direct benefit to low to moderate income individuals, or LMI. And the benefit requirement is that 51% of the individuals benefiting from the CDBG investment must be LMI individuals. We get into a little bit more detail about that in these coming slides, but we also have more information about this in our CDBG program implementation guide, which can be found on our website. And we also will have pre-application meetings prior to individuals who might be applying for any of our CDBG programs, and we can get into more detail about how your project might meet one of these national objectives. In order for a grant application to be considered under the area benefit category of the LMI national objective, the following conditions must apply. The benefit that the CDBG funds are supporting must be available to all of the residents of the defined project area. The project area must be primarily residential in character. At least 51% of the beneficiaries in the project area must be low to moderate income. And the applicant can conduct an income survey to establish the percentage of LMI beneficiaries if needed. The next category that you can apply to under the LMI national objective is called limited clientele. And in that situation, the project that you're applying for might not be open and available to everybody in the service area. It's likely benefiting a specific group of individuals where at least 51% are LMI. And so we can determine eligibility under one of the following tests. You can, if the group that's being served is what HUD considers to be a presumed group, and you can see what categories make up that in the blue box on your screen, then we can just have documentation that indicate that the clientele for this activity is benefiting a presumed group. Sometimes we need to have income determinations that require, it's a document that documents family size and the income to show that the individuals benefiting are LMI. You can have I should note that updated family income verification surveys that include the most current income limits are available on our website. So we have an actual form based off of the HUD data that we provide if you need to collect information that way and don't otherwise already otherwise collect it. And then the other test is that it can be of such nature and location, which means that the type of activity that is being funded by CDBG and the location means that it could reasonably be concluded that the beneficiaries will be low and moderate income. So again, we could talk with you more about your specific project and who is going to be benefiting from the project and determine if it needs to be met by the LMC objective how which manner that we can get that documentation. If your project is a affordable housing project, then the project must again predominantly serve low to moderate income occupants. Also, multifamily housing requires affordable rents. And for we don't typically fund single family housing in New Hampshire at this time. But that requires, if it were to be funded, 100% LMI benefit for that to be covered. And then I want to note that CDBG typically cannot fund construction of new housing. That's written in statute, and that's because there's other HUD programs that are designed to fund new housing construction. However, CDBG can sometimes be used to fund new construction if the activity is being carried out by a community-based development organization. And we have information about what that is, and would love to talk to you more about that to see if your organization might meet that criteria. However, I would just say in general, the best way to support housing activities using CDBG funds is for acquisition and rehabilitation, turning existing structures into housing or renovating existing housing to meet health and safety code and requirements. If you are applying for the CDBG Economic Development Program and the Micro Enterprise Program, there are different eligibility criteria or different eligibility avenues that you can meet the national objective. The activities must either create permanent jobs or a full-time equivalent basis, and at least 60% of those jobs must be held or made available to low to moderate income persons. It can be job creation or job retention, but the key is it is not filling existing jobs. It is either creating new jobs or retaining jobs as a result of the CDBG investment. And we get into more detail again about that in our CDBG implementation guide. Yes.
Molly, if I could just pause you for one moment to clarify, we do have a question about regional planning commissions being eligible for resources. Can you talk a little bit about how that type of an application might be structured?
Yeah, so regional planning commissions are eligible to apply for funding if they are carrying out a CDBG eligible project. So they would still have to apply through the likely the county that they're located in, or if the project is a municipal based project, apply through the municipality where the project is located. And so again, that there's that federal requirement that a eligible sub-applicant cannot come in on their own, would need to work through that local unit, the appropriate local unit of government to apply for funds if they're looking to carry out a project. And we can talk more a little bit further in the presentation, but regional planning commissions do often act as CDBG grant administrators as well. So they have another role in addition to potentially carrying out projects that might have them involved with the CDBG projects that we'll talk more about in a little bit.
Great, thank you. Those are all the questions I see right now.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So right now, we're just going to talk a little bit about CDBG eligible activities and programs. So the first thing when considering applying for CDBG funds is to determine if your project can meet a national objective and how it might do that, which is what we just talked about. And then the next step, the second thing, is to determine if the activities that you're looking to undertake with the CDBG funds would meet the eligibility requirements for CDBG. So there's HUD puts out a long list of eligible activities that can be funded with CDBG. And so as a first step, we are looking to make sure that those activities would be eligible. Again, we hold pre-application meetings as part of the application process to discuss this with interested applicants and determine what eligible activity might align with the project that you're looking to undertake. So these eligible activities we have grouped together into different funding opportunities here at CDFA. And so we took the eligible activities that CDBG prescribes and then kind of broke them out into the similar types and have corresponding funding opportunities. And the first one I just want to talk a little bit about is the CDBG Planning Grant Program. And as the name implies, it funds planning and related activities. And the key is that these funds should be used to determine whether a product is viable to move on to implementation. So examples of eligible activities that might be covered under the planning grant program are income surveys. If you're not sure if the people that are benefiting from the project would meet HUD income requirements, you could pay for staff or for a third party to come in and help with income surveys. A common use of the funds is for preliminary architectural and engineering design. That's often needed and able to get a good idea of what the full scope of work is and cost estimates. Those cost estimates could be covered under CDBG planning grant funds. Also, market analysis, energy audits, and other preliminary studies or information that is critical to figuring out the scope and viability of a project are typically what is covered under our regular planning grant program. Applicants are expected to expend those funds if awarded within a 12-month period. So it's a shorter time window, and again, it's meant to determine viability and if a project can move forward. We just have a graphic here that just shows the cover page of an infrastructure study. That is one type of thing that can be used, CDBG planning grant funds can be used for. The CDBG housing program is another funding opportunity that that can be utilized. Housing activities include those meeting the national objective of providing or improving permanent residential structures. And these permanent residential structures are to be occupied by low to moderate income households upon completion. So rental and owner occupied housing is eligible, and low to moderate income homeowners and landlords that rent to LMI residents are eligible for financial assistance. So eligibility is very nuanced, but activities include, but aren't necessarily limited to, acquisition or rehabilitation of housing, elderly or ADA access to existing housing. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, new construction in some situations, if it's carried out by a federally recognized community-based development organization. Again, some of the conditions that are required if CDBG funds are used to help with housing is that there is a long-term affordability requirement that's a 10-year minimum. CDFA increased that period to a minimum of 10 years in order to ensure that the investment of public funds is benefiting LMI individuals for a more substantial period. Previously, 5 years was a requirement, but we definitely want to make sure that these investments are benefiting individuals for a long time. Landlords cannot charge rent that exceeds the fair market rent as established by HUD, and housing quality standards must be met on all units that are using CDBG funds. And then lastly, we take a look at per unit costs and to be determined upon how much funding is being proposed per unit. This right here is just an example of a recently funded CDBG housing project. It was the Brown School in Berlin that was no longer used as a school, and the city sold the building to a developer who developed it into affordable housing. It's a great example. Another one of our primary funding programs is the Public Facilities Program. There's a couple of different subcategories that fall under the Public Facilities Program umbrella. These include water and sewer infrastructure programs. This must be in a residential area, and this primarily residential area, again, must be primarily low to moderate income individuals. The types of activities that can be covered under this type of project include extending or replacing water and sewer lines, constructing water or sewer treatment facilities, and then constructing water storage tanks or reservoirs and wells and things of that nature. The other type of project under public facilities is the investment in the physical infrastructure, which is the building where public services are provided. So eligible activities for public facilities grants in this category include the acquisition, construction, or rehabilitation of facilities where things like food pantries are held, nonprofit mental health services, or senior centers. Those type of activities, those are public services that are benefiting predominantly low to moderate income individuals, and eligible applicants can apply for funding to make improvements in that space. And again, it's not for operating costs, it's actually for brick and mortar construction and things like that. And then the last type of category under public facilities is public property, which is not a priority area for New Hampshire, but there are things like streets, sidewalks, and recreation areas and medical facilities. So we have a slightly longer list of the type of activities that can be funded under this category, but you'll see in our application and program guide that we prioritize activities because we need to do that in order to make sure funding aligns with the highest need in the state. And so in New Hampshire, out of all these subcategories of public facilities, the public property is the lowest priority. And there is often a match requirement for funds. So you have to come in with a one-to-one match for those type of projects. The other types of projects that I was just talking about do not, the water and sewer and the public facilities do not have a match requirement if it can be demonstrated in the application that there is a need for CDBG funding for the whole project or for a good portion of the project. And the example we wanted to show you for a public facilities project is the Little Antlers Learning Center, which is operated by Mid-State Health Center. They're a federally qualified community health center in Plymouth that had an existing learning center that expanded and moved into a new building. And both actually CDBG public facilities and CDBG economic development funds were used to support this project. So it was a great project in Plymouth. There's also a CDBG economic development program, and the goal of the economic development program is to expand economic opportunities for low and moderate income individuals. You'll see here on the screen the types of eligible activities that can be included. It's typically like the purchase of equipment, working capital, public facility improvements that support that business that's creating jobs, and things of that nature. Again, all projects must result in job creation or job retention, and those jobs must be held by or made available to low to moderate income residents. And an example, this is several years back now, but the Monadnock Food Co-op utilized a CDBG economic development grant for some improvements there and to help with for job creation and retention. There are some specific activities that HUD statute calls out as being not eligible. And so they have a long list again of eligible activities. Then there is a shorter list, but a very clear list of ineligible activities that I just wanted to touch upon. The general expense of conducting government is not eligible. So we often get inquiries if there is, for example, town offices that are in need of a new HVAC system or a new roof or something of that nature. And unfortunately, that's typically not eligible because the activities that that building is housing are the general conduct of government. It's town hall, city clerk, those type of things. And so that type of activity is not eligible. That's considered the general conduct of government. And along with that, construction of government buildings is not eligible, nor is political activities of any sort. Again, like I've already touched upon a couple of times, new housing construction is generally not permissible. Also, the expense of operating and maintaining public facilities. So again, we can fund the infrastructure improvements in a public facility, but we cannot fund operating expenses or general maintenance of those buildings. And then lastly, purchase of personal property is generally not eligible with these federal funds. All right. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about the CDBG program application process. So this chart right here shows an overview of the different CDBG, the New Hampshire CDBG programs and the maximum award amounts for each program and the application deadlines that correspond. Again, we CDFA administers several different CDBG programs throughout the year. As I mentioned at the start, my colleague Molly Donovan oversees the CDBG Economic Development and Micro Enterprise Program and any planning and emergency grants that are related to those programs. And then I oversee our housing and public facilities programs and the related planning and emergency grants. Today, this workshop does focus a little more heavily on the housing and public facilities program. However, we have already mentioned and will also in the remainder of the presentation briefly give an overview of the other CDBG programs as well. You'll see again the funding limits for each of the programs and there's also a requirement that I want to note that each municipality or a county, whoever the applicant, the eligible local government applicant is, does have limitations on how many CDBG applications they can submit in a year. It's not actually a limitation by applications, it's by the amount of funds each eligible entity applies for each program year. Each municipality can apply for up to $500,000 for housing or $750,000 if it's permanent supportive housing, which I'll talk more about further along. But if one specific type of housing project, which is permanent supportive housing, is eligible for a slightly higher amount of $750,000. So an eligible municipality can apply. That's the maximum award amount if it's that type of project, or $500,000 if it's just a general affordable housing project. Each municipality is eligible for up to $500,000 a year for public facilities and for economic development. And then for planning grants, there is not a limit at the municipal level of how many that can be applied for. The limits don't count against other programs. So again, it aligns with each funding opportunity. So a county, for example, could come in and apply for $500,000 for a housing project, and at the same time come in and apply for $500,000 for a public facility project. It's the limitations are aligned with the specific program. This slide right here highlights the applications for the CDBG housing and the CDBG public facilities programs. While they are separate programs that have their own scoring criteria and housing projects are reviewed amongst housing projects and the public facilities projects are reviewed amongst public facilities projects. We do hold the rounds at the same time, so they share an application deadline and other key dates. The review is happening at the same time. We already had our first round of the CDBG program year. The CDBG program year doesn't follow a calendar year. It runs July 1st through June 30th. And so so right now we're currently in CDBG program year 2025, and we had our first round of this program year back in July, and this round is coming up in January of 2026 is actually our second round of this program year. Even though it's into the next calendar year, it still is round 2 of program year 2025. And so you'll see that due date is Monday, January 26th, 2026, by 4 o'clock that day. So again, I just want to talk a little bit about a CDBG who your CDBG application team might be comprised of. Because again, CDBG is a little bit different than other grant programs in that there always needs to be a eligible municipality or a county as the applicant, and sometimes that entity is the one carrying out the project, but often there is another entity involved, and that is the one that's carrying out the project. We refer to those individuals as sub-applicants, or those entities as sub-applicants. And again, if then the project is awarded, we on the flip side refer to them as sub-grantees. So applicants and sub-applicants, or grantee and sub-grantee. Their CDBG is a complex federal program, and it has a fair amount of federal requirements before an application is even submitted, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And then there is certainly a good amount of federal compliance required when the project is underway and funds are being expended. And so for those reasons, a project is strongly encouraged to work with a trained CDBG grant writer. That is an entity or an individual that's typically hired by the municipality, and that person writes the application, makes sure any pre-submission compliance steps are met, and will be the one to work in CDFA's grant management system and get that submitted. And funding for that CDBG grant writer can come off the top of the application, at the top of your CDBG award if the project is awarded funding. It's strongly recommended that you work with somebody that is a trained CDBG grant writer, but it is not a requirement. However, if your project is funded, then you are required to hire a CDBG trained grant administrator. And again, that entity or individual will help both the municipality and the sub recipient, if there is one, to make sure that all CDBG rules and regulations are followed. People who work as CDBG grant writing grant administrators include regional planning commissions. So as we mentioned earlier, several of the regional planning commissions around the state have staff that are trained to help write CDBG grants and to help administer awards. There's also individual consultants out there who do this work as well. And again, it is up to the applicant to go out and put out an RFP or to work with the Regional Planning Commission to help with grant writing, and then on the flip side, if awarded, help with a grant administrator. It's really important to have a strong team applying for the fund and carrying out the project if awarded. There's a lot going on this slide, but this is a snapshot of the steps that are necessary to be awarded funds through the CDBG program. In general, for all of the CDBG programs, it takes a minimum of 3 months from application submission to CDFA approval. And then there is a secondary piece that has to happen where all of the awarded funds, the contracts between CDFA and the grantee need to go through New Hampshire's governor and council process, which adds an additional 4 to 6 weeks onto the process. So this chart here just shows the different steps, starting with a pre-application meeting with CDFA and the project team to talk about the application, and then moves through the submission of the application, the CDFA staff review, and then there's a community development advisory committee that CDFA has that helps advise staff on all of the program details and funding decisions. And that committee typically meets monthly, and all funding decisions to us are approved by that advisory committee. And then the step again that I just mentioned is that there needs to be a contracting process and the governor and council process as the final step before the funds are considered successfully awarded to an entity. All right. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the CDBG application thresholds. So as I mentioned in an earlier slide, there are a number of steps that need to happen before an application is even submitted to CDFA. And upon receipt of an application, our team reviews the application to make sure all of these pieces are included with it. The first type of threshold are the municipal application thresholds. These are specific federal CDBG requirements that must be met at the municipal level. These include things like the citizen participation and engagement process, and it has to occur again first prior to even submitting the application, and then if funded, there are other steps to this as well. These requirements ensure that the local community is informed about the CDBG program and that specific applications for federal funds and the specific applications for federal funds that are underway in the community. You'll see on the screen that we have a list here of the steps that need to happen, starting with a public notice that the municipality or county is intending to apply for CDBG funds. There needs to be a public hearing that occurs. There's a number of steps that have to happen at that public hearing, including the governing board giving authority to somebody at the municipal level to sign for the application and the consent to actually apply. There is a housing and community development plan that each municipality or county needs to have in place. And then each project needs to include a residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan, and that needs to be adopted by the applicant prior to submission. And lastly, like I mentioned, that there needs to be authorization of the governing body to its authorized official to apply for CDBG. So again, I won't get into too much detail, but other than to say that all of these steps need to happen prior to submitting the application, and evidence that these things have happened need to be uploaded with your application. And again, that's why CDBG trained grant writers are a great resource, because they have been through this before and can help with this process. And that is one of the first things that's reviewed on the applications once they are submitted here to CDFA. There's also just general application thresholds that are checked. Obviously, one obvious one is to make sure that the application is complete. So we review that shortly after it comes in and make sure all sections are complete and all required documents have been uploaded. We have to make sure all those documentation, all that documentation conforms to federal, state, and program rules and regulations. We make sure that the project meets initial readiness criteria, and there's a series of capacity assessment and financial review, and then compliance plan review and energy policy that all get reviewed initially before an application even moves on to the scoring part of the application review process. I'm gonna give myself a little break here and turn the presentation over to my colleague Chris Monroe, and he's going to touch upon the compliance plan review and then talk a little bit about the energy requirements for the program. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Molly. Yep, Chris Monroe, Senior Community Development Manager at CDFA. And as Molly mentioned, I'll talk a little bit about our application compliance program and our clean energy policy as well. So as part of your CDBG application, you have to, or your grant writer will have to submit a compliance plan, which overviews a lot of the items that Molly's talked about, along with some others that we haven't gotten into yet, or you might get into with implementation. So the first item is the national objective and eligible activity. As Molly mentioned, for national objective, that likely will be the low moderate income benefit. So for this, you have to identify how you're proving that you're meeting that national objective, whether it's an income survey or you're working with a group of presumed beneficiaries, which HUD has a more detailed list, but that could be disabled individuals who have lost their housing or are homeless, other things like that. And then eligible activity, as Molly mentioned, is it could be an acquisition of a property that you're hoping to turn into a shelter, or it could be you have a manufactured housing cooperative that is a nonprofit that is looking to complete some infrastructure upgrades, those kinds of things. So you would have to identify your national objective and your eligible activity. Another key piece of a CDBG application is identifying how you're going to complete your environmental review. Are you working with an environmental consultant who's going to be doing an environmental review of the scope of the project and identifying if it can convert to exempt or if it's subject to a finding of significant impact or finding no significant impact? Those kinds of things will be identified in the section of the compliance plan. The next item is financial management under 2 CFR 200. Sub-applicants and grantees are responsible for the financial management of the project, so ensuring that federal dollars are accounted for throughout the process. So that would include, who's going to be responsible for managing sort of the accounting of the project and the flow of funds. Federal procurement. So if your project's going to be like an infrastructure project or a rehab project or anything that will require construction or contractors, you have to identify how you're going to procure those and ensure that you're falling under the 2 CFR 200 standards. There are also newer compliance items like BABA, which is Build America, Buy America, and domestic procurement. So you have to identify if your project is likely going to be subject to those items and how you're going to ensure that you're meeting compliance with that. Federal labor standards would be your Davis-Bacon wage rates, and that would be like if your project has construction or rehab. If it's an acquisition, it won't be subject to those kinds of things. Then CDBG acquisition relocation. So as Molly mentioned, the RARA or relocation plan is an important piece of your application and public hearing process. If you're going to be acquiring property, there are federal standards you have to follow related to if there are existing tenants, you have to provide notices to those tenants. And if you're going to be, moving them out of the property for a period of time while you're renovating the property, there are certain standards you have to follow related to that. And then reporting and record keeping. So that's going to be how you're maintaining standards related to document retention and storage, how you're working with the grantee to accommodate for that, or, if you're a grantee and you have a subrecipient, how basically the roles and responsibilities and timeline for tracking those records as part of the project. And then monitoring and closeout. So that would be at the end of the project when the activity is substantially complete. The project will go through a monitoring. So CDFA will come in and review the documentation that's been submitted over the course of the project. We'll review claims and pay requisitions. We'll review the Davis-Bacon wage rates and payrolls, or if you acquired a property, we'd make sure that the deed has been updated to reflect current ownership, and then go through that closeout process. So those are, as part of this, you would be working with your grant writer to fill out as much detail as possible. It doesn't have to be incredibly lengthy, but it just has to cover kind of the who's taking care of these pieces and some of the general components of each individual piece in the compliance plan. So that's why it's, again, important you're working with a qualified grant administrator if you're awarded funds, because they will assist in taking care of many of these items. So next, I'll talk about our energy programs and energy policy. So at CDFA, we have a couple of clean energy programs. We have clean energy financing and energy technical assistance. And those programs you can leverage sometimes in preparation for your CDBG application. So if you complete an energy audit or an energy charrette as part of the design and planning that goes into a rehab or into construction of a facility or something like that, we can provide support in those areas. And then regarding our energy policy, the intent is for projects to evaluate energy opportunities through operating and maintenance costs, occupant comfort and health, and facility durability. The timeline for implementing the energy policy as part of your application is that it's an application threshold requirement. So before you submit your application, you have to discuss how you're meeting the goals of the energy policy, which we'll talk about in a few slides. The project types that fall under this energy policy would be alterations or new construction, rehab, those kinds of things. And we do have a waiver process, but it's considered on a case-by-case basis, and those will be submitted through your application, reviewed by Scott Maslansky, who's the director of our energy programs. So this slide details our energy policy and kind of the two different levels, which are the requirements as part of your application and then the recommendations. So for the requirements, a level 2 energy audit or energy design charrette, if your project impacts any energy related building systems. And again, that's part of your application. And as I mentioned, we do have a program that provides a 75% grant to cover the costs of that process. And then documented consultation with appropriate utilities for incentives. So that would be like Liberty or Unitil. There are oftentimes, or were at some points, rebates or funds available that can help, your project upgrade to LED lights or provide some building envelope measures that will improve the energy use and comfortability of your property. So that is an important piece, and is important to document that you've at least reached out to the utilities to see if there's any funds available that might help your project. And then for our energy policy recommendations, it's that your project incorporates reasonable recommendations from the energy audit that exceed current New Hampshire State Energy Code, that you implement high performance construction, LEED, Energy Star, Passive House, or Net Zero, commissioning of any new energy system, building electrification, installation of solar voltaics, so photovoltaics. So those are all recommendations that would likely come out of your energy audit or energy charrette. And we understand that, especially now, that cost of projects can be prohibitive when it comes to our energy policy. So we ask that you consider implementing, a lot of those design pieces, but understand that it isn't always financially feasible for the project, or the return on the investment is not going to make sense for your project. So, things like preparing your building for photovoltaics, but not actually installing the solar panels, maybe at a later date you do that. So there are certain things you can do. That's why it's a recommendation and not a requirement. The requirement is that you're completing an energy audit or design charrette to at least identify what you can do in the future to meet those energy goals. For water and wastewater projects, the requirements are an energy audit and consultation with appropriate utilities for implementation incentives. Again, if it's like a tie-in, or if you're a manufactured housing cooperative and you have a pump station that doesn't utilize a lot, or it doesn't necessarily make sense to implement, or there might not be a lot of existing upgrades that you can implement to meet those energy requirements, that's okay. You just have to still complete that energy audit and then consult with the utilities to see if there are any incentives for your project. And these are some contacts for the utilities, so we can assist you in getting contacts for the utility that you fall under, so that you can reach out and identify if there are any incentives or rebates or money available that can help support you in your project. So the next steps regarding the energy policy is to review the CDFA energy policy. If you haven't done so, contact your utility. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Scott Maslansky, or you can contact me as well, and I can funnel those questions to Scott to try to get you on the right path, and then provide a plan to meet policy requirements in your application. And there's a section in your application that you can talk about how you're going to meet those requirements. This is just a contact page for Scott. And I'll turn it back over to Molly.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. And thank you all for hanging in there. I know this is a lot of information. We're moving into the last part of the presentation now, and we certainly will have some time for questions at the end if any have come up while you're listening to this information. So this next section, we're going to discuss how CDBG applications are evaluated and scored. We're just going to get into a little bit more detail. If the application is determined to be complete and meets those threshold requirements that I talked about earlier, then it will enter into the rating and ranking process. In our housing and public facilities programs, those funds are offered in rounds, and so the product will be scored on its own merits for some of the criteria and in relationship to other applications that were received in that round. But for our other programs, we accept applications on a rolling deadline, and typically these criteria that we're going to talk about aren't in relation to other projects that have been received in the round. As we discussed, CDFA will evaluate applications, and we're going to use the criteria that's listed here, starting with, is the applicant and sub-applicant, if there is one, eligible? We make sure that the project meets a CDBG national objective. We review both of the applicants and sub-applicants' capacity to carry out the grant. Or to carry out the grant and the project. And so that this includes a review of the applicant and sub-applicant's financial picture. And there are a number of financial documents that you are asked to upload with the application to help us with that review. We review the amount of funds being requested, and to determine if that seems appropriate, and also if there are enough committed funding resources to complete the project. For CDBG, we require that all funding except for the CDBG is in place at the time of application. So if you have a project that exceeds the amount of funds you can get from CDBG, that other funding needs to be secured prior to applying. And we are looking for evidence that those funds are secured when we review your application. And then, of course, we're just also reviewing that all specific program area requirements are met as a first step. Then each of our programs has a scoring matrix that we use to score, and you can find the details for all of the programs and the related, the relevant scoring criteria in our CDBG application, CDBG application program and application guide, excuse me. And so we'll include a link to that in the presentation, and we will also be including a link to that in our follow-up email that goes out after this presentation today. But in the CDBG app and program guide, you can find these details, these criteria. All the programs look at the core data index, and that is a measure of the poverty and other socioeconomic challenges. And there was previously another set of data that were used with CDBG applications, and about 5 years back now, CDFA replaced that with this core data index. It's the information for this measurement comes from a variety of sources, including the U.S. Census Bureau, New Hampshire Employment Security, New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, and many others. And the community progress indicators serve as the basis for the core data index. And the core data index is what you'll see as a metric that we're looking at in the CDBG scoring system. Each year that is updated on an annual basis, and that is an appendix of the application and program guide for the program. So you can see what score aligns with the municipality or the county that your project is serving in that appendix. Housing projects are scored on a 200 point scoring matrix. There is a minimum score of 100, and that is required. The project is required to get at least 100 points to be able to be recommended for funding. Again, some of the criteria are project specific, and then some are relative to other projects that applied for CDBG funds in the same round. And you can see on this slide, it's just an overview and of the scoring criteria, and then what possible score you can get on the side. And in our application and program guide, we get into detail about each of those criteria and what you would need to demonstrate in the application to get that maximum score. Right here is the same thing for the CDBG public facilities program. It also is on a 200 point scale, and there is also a $100 point minimum requirement for the project to be recommended for funding. And again, because we accept applications for this program as part of a round, some of the criteria are project specific, and some of the criteria are relative to the other projects that applied in the same round. For economic development projects, scoring depends on the type of project and what kind of entity is implementing that project. It could be a business, a community, or nonprofit organization. There is a minimum score for each category, ranging from 265 for business loans to 250 for grants to nonprofits and public infrastructure projects that support job retention. Again, in all cases, the project must result in retention or creation of jobs for low to moderate income people. And I think that's good for this slide. For the planning grant program, the scoring criteria focuses less on external factors, and it focuses on the project. Each planning application shall be submitted under, it has to be planning for a housing grant, planning for a public facilities grant, or planning for an economic development grant. And there's a minimum of 25 points that can be awarded. So it's a smaller, a lower maximum award amount that you can get for planning. And applications must have at least 12 points to be considered for funding. And you can see that criteria that we're looking at outlined on the slide. CDFA also has an emergency grant program. The name is kind of misleading because it needs to be used for projects that can demonstrate that a stated emergency has occurred within the past 18 months. And it also must meet the minimum application thresholds for our regularly occurring CDBG programs like housing, public facilities, and economic development. Applications that meet these requirements will be reviewed and scored based upon the scoring criteria of the applicable program. So if it's a housing project and it's coming in under the emergency program, then we will be using the housing scoring matrix. The thing that is kind of confusing about the title is that we are able to process these applications not in a round as they come in, but it still has to these applications still have to go through the CDFA review process and then the governor and council process. So it does take still several months to apply for and potentially be granted funds under this program. So it often isn't the best resource for projects that are true emergency in nature that need funding as soon as possible because of the cumbersome process to apply for the funds. It's best for a project that is responding to an emergency but isn't as time sensitive as some others might be. So again, this is the timeline for the upcoming housing and public facilities round. We are starting to move into the preparation period for the next program deadline. Again, applications are next due on Monday, January 26, 2026, and that is for the housing and public facilities program. Once the applications come in on that last Monday in January, we'll begin the review process immediately. That will take place through that for beginning that last week in January through early April. We will go through those steps that we have outlined in this presentation that include the threshold review, the application evaluation using the scoring criteria. We do what we call site visits, and that the review team goes out around the state to visit the projects and ask questions and see the project site as part of the review process. And then scoring is finalized and recommendations will be made to the Community Development Advisory Committee that we refer to as CDAC at their April meeting. I want to note that all of the applications for the CDBG program need to be submitted through CDFA's grant management system, or GMS. For the CDBG program, because it is the applicant is needs to be the municipality or the county, it needs to be the municipality or county or the hired grant writer that is the entity that is registering and entering the application information in the grant management system. Typically, the sub-applicant does not work in the grant management system, and typically even the applicant is minimally in the grant management system. It's the grant writer who coordinates this on behalf of all the parties involved in the application process. If awarded, all funding, all claims for reimbursement will be paid and will be submitted and paid through the grant management system as well. So it's used on the front end for the application process, and then if awarded, it's used to manage your grant and pay claims on the back side. I just want to note that the CDFA website is a great resource for the information that we talked about today, as well as information about our other programs. We have a main website and then a resource website that you can get to from that gold button in the right-hand corner that we have circled in the slide here. The resource website is where you want to be if you want to get specific information, in this case about the CDBG program. program. We have the information that we just outlined about the application process, and then we also have important documents that we have linked to there. And so please check out our website for information. And if you need any help navigating it or have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. There's also a button that is on our website that I wanted to point out that you can request a meeting. So if you want to talk with the team here at CDFA about your project to see if it might possibly be eligible for CDBG or maybe align with one of CDFA's other funding programs, we encourage you to visit our website and hit that button. And we just ask you to include a little bit of information about your project. And then we will follow up and schedule a meeting with you to learn more about your funding need and discuss what next steps might be best. This just is a screenshot of the CDBG section of our website that I just referenced. And again, the gold section on the side has different sections that there are different sections that you can go to get more information about the CDBG program. And then this slide right here just gives my contact information, and we just wanted to this is the end of the content of the application, but we have end of the content of the presentation, but we still certainly have a few minutes left for questions, so I'll throw it over to Melissa to flag any questions that we may have already gotten. And then once I answer those, you're welcome to, chime in with any additional questions that might have come up as I walked through all this information.
Yes, thank you, Molly and Chris. A lot of really good information in a short amount of time. And we do have a question around further definitions for the clean energy policy and what a level 2 energy audit means. They say, for example, they have a lead and rehab with new windows of a brick building. Where can I verify that projects requires a level 2 energy audit? I did drop a link to our policy in the chat, but imagine that this is something you all would probably cover in a pre-application meeting. Or Chris, maybe you have some more information on what to expect.
Yeah, I would say that would be a good Scott question. So we've included his contact information, but I can certainly, we have your email and we can try to follow up as well. I'm not sure how best to do that, but definitely that would be a good Scott question.
Right, and even in those upfront meetings of discussing the potential application, if those types of questions come up, our staff is really great at making sure that we're connecting you with Scott or other resources on our team that make sense so that you can get the information you need to put forth the best application possible. I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time. Noting we did drop a couple of different links to resources in the chat, but we'll be following up with an email to everybody who's registered today with all of these relevant links, as well as the recording and today's presentation. And we do have a question in the chat about how long does it typically take from application to funding availability?
That's a great question. I would say that it typically takes 4 to 6 months for application review and for projects that are awarded funding to go through the governor and council process. And funding is not secured and confirmed until it is through that governor and council process. So we ask that you do make sure that you build in that length of time in on the front end when you're thinking about the timeline of your project, and we can answer any questions that you might have that's specific to your project or in any pre-application or early meetings that we have with you. All right.
Not seeing additional questions at this time, Molly and Chris.
All right. Then I think we can go ahead and close out the webinar here, but I just want to take one last opportunity to encourage you all to reach out if you have any questions. We're presenting a lot of information to you today about this federal program, and it has a lot of different requirements, and we are here to help you understand that process and help you determine if this funding might align with your funding needs. So please don't hesitate to use that button that I pointed out to earlier on the website and request an opportunity to talk with us as a first step to determine if it even makes sense to move forward with potentially submitting an application.